Hello to the tens of you who watch these on YouTube. This is another gathering of the Writers Roundtable. Today we got a fun mix with Ruth Ashkenazi. We got Randy Lioz, Michael Harrington, and James Coan. Randy, did I say that right?
Yep.
Is it Lioz? Okay.
Lioz.
Lioz.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So today, let's see, since our last Writers Roundtable, we've had George Floyd's murder. We've had protests which have turned into riots, which have turned into a more sort of sweeping cultural, some would say, due reckoning with our past. Some would say like a Maoist type pushing over of old norms. So a lot has happened since our last meeting. I thought it would be a good chance for us to talk about it and do our Braver Angels thing. For me, I think I want to talk sort of about where Braver Angels is situated in this moment. I know for me personally, I've had a sort of interesting journey with what's been going on the last month or so, when everything's kind of gone kablooey, and not to mention the sort of resurgence of the virus, especially where a lot of us are in California. It's funny because in some ways I see Braver Angels in a sort of small C, like George Will-ish type conservative organization, in that it you go to a Braver Angels event, they have quotes from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It's very rooted in our nation's history and the best ideals of this country, which I've been thinking a lot about as these protests, which there have been some small riots and the tearing down of the statues, as all that has gone on. Because for me personally, like Confederate statues, I don't really care if they go down. I don't like necessarily all the tactics that have led. I would rather, the municipalities themselves decide to take them down, as opposed to people with ropes. But I'm not really sad to see them go. But when I saw, people burning a statue of George Washington and tearing that down and spray painting it, I had a visceral reaction to it, a very angry reaction. And I think I felt the most like despair and the most despondent and the most polarized I've ever felt, I think maybe ever in my adult life. I thought, these people can't win. Like these radicals can't win. I don't care who wins, but these people cannot win. And I just sort of like expanded it, the crazy actions of a few into like the whole other side, which I know through Braver Angels is not what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to think. But in that moment, I was so mad that I couldn't help think that way. And so I was talking to a friend about it and just sort of explaining my dilemma and talking about, like, I know because of my work in Braver Angels, this is not the way to think. And he said, well, he said it very casually, well, Braver Angels is operating in an outdated paradigm. And that stayed with me a bit. And I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. Because in some ways, I don't think that's true. I think Braver Angels takes people as they come and gives them a chance to speak, to say what's on their mind. And I think that's increasingly rare in this country. And I think that's almost radical in certain respects. And I love that about Braver Angels. But in some ways, I sometimes think Braver Angels is in danger of tilting towards wanting to push people into something that they're not. And I've written about this a few times, that it's not, that it's sort of, in some of its messaging, it can sort of be so idealistic that it becomes unrealistic, which sounds very catchphrasey, but I swear I didn't think of it until just now. and that it can kind of push for this conception of the public good, and when in reality, as if there's one objective public good, when in reality there's at least two competing and irreconcilable versions of that public good, and that we just are going to have to learn to live with the fact that like people aren't going to get along. And sometimes I don't know if Braver Angels, or at least our messaging, is prepared to live in that reality. But in other times I'm like so happy to have this thing that allows people to speak. So that's a long way to kick things off, but I just wonder what other people think about this topic. I know, Michael, you had some thoughts, so why didn't you start?
Well, that's a lot. It's a lot on our plate here. And I'm sure maybe I'll just add a few things and people can jump in. But like I said, I've been working, I'm a political scientist, and my field is public policy. And so I've been working in this area for a long time. And it was only in 2004 that I started to turn towards polarization, because it was kind of subsuming everything else I was working on, which I'm a trade, I study trade and capital markets. And so, but policy didn't make any sense when everyone talked about was red and blue states, because, and that seemed to be the topic. And I remember in 2004, listening to this discussion of red and blue polarization on TV, and in media narratives. And it just graded me the wrong way, because it just didn't ring true based on what I was seeing from graphic representations of data. And so I decided to plunge into that data to find out what was really going on. And there were a lot of other scholars doing it at this time too. Morris Fiorina, and even journalists like David Brooks, and journalists like Joel Kotkin. And there was another journalist in Texas, Bill Bishop. And we all was starting to look at the data and exchanging ideas and things. And we thought, there's no real polarization here. This is kind of a narrative that has been created because it kind of is very appealing to have that kind of character-driven narrative on media and television. You get people to watch, you get people to read newspapers. And it turned to this subcultural idea that, well, if you drive a pickup truck and listen to country music, you're going to vote one way. If you drive a Prius and hang out in Starbucks, you're going to vote another way. And of course, this was like, oh, this is kind of ridiculous. Okay, so looking at the data, it's like, no, there was no real polarization. It was really based on some deep-seated differences in how people lived their lives based on where they lived and how they lived. Basically, if you were married and you thought differently than if you were single. And that's always been the case. The politics have appealed that way. If you lived in the country or the suburbs rather than in the urban environment, you wanted different policies. But since then, since 2004, this narrative that we are so different that we can't even compromise on certain things because of who we are has become almost self-fulfilling. It's that people start sorting and then start, actually behaving this way, behaving that if I'm red, I cannot agree with someone who's blue. And it's kind of crazy, but you see that the media narrative and the political electoral, behavior pushes us in that direction. And I remember at this time, we were trying to sell this more of a we're really not that different narrative to Hollywood to make a documentary. And everybody was very interested because George Bush was president, and all the Hollywood people were liberal, and they said, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong. What is it? What's going on? And I found that when we were trying to, market that and promote that documentary, as soon as Barack Obama got elected, everybody lost interest. Everybody in Hollywood said, problem solved, okay? And at that time I said, No, I'm sorry. And I wrote this. Not only is the problem not solved, it's going to get much worse because it's not the guy at the top that's directing this, but it serves the purpose for the people at the top to say, hey, there's them and us. You got to vote for me. Otherwise, them are going to win. And Trump has taken this to the, the nth level, right? And so I almost feel like I'm sympathetic to what your friend was saying, that we're dealing with a broken paradigm as opposed to an obsolete one. And that, yeah, we're in a Cold War that just turned hot in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And it's kind of crazy, but, I think that if I didn't think that rational people could come together, I wouldn't be spending my time here, right? So I think Braver Angels, it does add something positive to the conversation. My cynical side says yes, but it's probably not going to avoid the hot war. And so there's no reason to stop thinking about how to approach this in a positive manner, but you sort of have to put that in context that idealism probably isn't going to prevail here, but realism will. And, most of the country wants to live in reality. So I don't want to keep talking. So.
Yeah. Well, Randy, I know you have some stuff to say, but Michael, real quick, do you have any guesses as to why? So like you said, I think there was a sort of feeling amongst, I guess, the Hollywood liberals that like things were fine once Barack Obama was elected. There were no more problems. And I never gotten the sense that Republicans, populists, people on the right, I sort of hesitate to call them conservatives out of my own sort of issues with that. But I've never gotten the sense that they're like, oh, and things are fine. Like there's still this sort of like we're under siege mentality, even when the top three, all three branches of government were under control of Republicans. Do you have a sense of why that might be the case or what caused that?
Well, you mean after Trump became president?
Yes.
Well, yes, because Trump's not a Republican, nor is he a conservative. So how could they think, oh, everything's fine? Trump is a disruptor. And so what they saw probably in the Obama years was that, no, not everything's fine. And the Republican Party's not really doing anything, so we need a disruptor.
But then they got their disruptor, and you're saying that they still don't feel fine because he's continuing to be a disruptor? Well, a disruptor doesn't establish a sense of stability and that things are okay. No, it's a war, and Trump is the red side's. Well, I wouldn't even say he's red. He's the guy that's appealing to people that feel that everything's broken and we need to upset the apple cart in Washington. And the people on the left, the radical leftists, feel the same way. I mean, some of these people that I've talked to that are supporting this idea of riots and Antifa and stuff like that, they wanted Bernie Sanders, who's another disruptor. Okay, he says we need to upset the apple cart of capitalism and put in socialism. This is not like, oh, everything's okay. I don't see anybody saying, oh, everything's okay. It's more like, no, everybody's on the ramparts and we're going to see who's going to win this battle. Okay. Randy, I promise we'll get to you next, but Ruth, you had a quick comment about that?
Oh yeah, James, to your point or your question about Republicans maybe having control of both houses, Republican president, the media, I think, continues to play a big role in making Republicans feel like they don't have a voice. And I would say the mainstream media is predominantly blue, and it makes Republicans feel, at the very least, sort of victimized and in the minority. So I think that's one reason they voice their grievances quite so often. Yeah. But James, Michael, I agree with you.
Randy, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I actually had a similar thought, interestingly enough, to Ruth's in response to Michael's idea about why particularly the Reds have decided that they still don't feel like they have a full stake and have a full say in what goes on in our politics because of that media narrative. But I think it actually goes beyond that. I think both sides actually feel that there is a strong media narrative that is unfair and is undermining them. So from the right side, you know, clearly, I think most of Hollywood, most of popular culture has generally bought into a more left-leaning, progressive viewpoint. I actually share that viewpoint, and I think that it is a productive one. But I also understand that it makes a certain segment of the population feel underrepresented. But then you get to the most progressive segment of the blues, and they feel like their narrative is being undermined by the entrenched forces that are, you know, obviously in 2016, we saw exactly that by the entrenched forces theoretically undermining the Bernie Sanders campaign and just defaulting to support of Hillary Clinton. So you do have, I think you have very common concerns on both sides, but I think that each side decides that the other side's narrative is invalid. It's really just our narrative that's the one that's the true narrative, that is the true undermining of people who are trying to expose what's really going on, while the other people who are really just out there to make money on on their own version of things aren't really being genuine in presenting those narratives. But back to the original overarching question of whether we are in a new paradigm. I think that the statement about what we do being outdated is kind of a testament to why it is so needed, because I have been dealing with objections on the left to the work that I do for a long time, and I think there's similar objections to people on the right, where there is a sense of genuine threat from the people on the other side, not necessarily to our own well-being, but for people that we heavily identify with and have staked our self-image on. So from, obviously speaking from the left, progressives are very heavily staked on the idea of protecting people, vulnerable populations who have been subject to the traditional power structures of this country for our entire history. And I do believe that largely that narrative is correct. I'm one of the people who actually values the New York Times 1619 campaign and things of that sort that expose the entrenched power structures that are racist and that have a history of perpetuating the victimhood of those those vulnerable populations. But at the same time, I think there's something very deeply wrong with the idea of writing off an entire multiple segments of the population as irredeemable and unworthy of our time to talk about what we truly believe, because we think that those people, if we allow them to say what they believe, that they are victimizing the people that we are trying to protect. I just think that is a very unproductive way of going about things, because as we've said many times, it's really difficult to fully embody someone else's perspective. And so when we put such stark terms on the victimization of other people, and if someone phrases something in a certain way that's furthering that victimization, and therefore you cannot put them in a position to have that conversation in a way that could possibly harm other people, then it cuts off so many different avenues for speech and for the ability of us to understand one another in this country, and it is so counterproductive. So I really believe, very deeply, that the mission of our organization in giving as many people a voice as possible, and yes, there can be some limits to that, but I think the limits should be relatively extreme. I want to talk to people who have worldviews that are so different from mine that I might not even be able to recognize them, or it's difficult for me to conceive how someone could think that. But if I am really about the mission that this organization is trying to further, then at least trying to understand as many different perspectives as possible, because of my inherent lack of omniscience as a human, I think is so core to our mission, and it is what we should be doing every single day, rather than warning against the dangers of engaging someone who, you know, could possibly say something that might hurt me or someone that I care about. I just do think that is incredibly unproductive.
I've got two follow-up questions for you. Just for my own curiosity, what'd you make of the New York Times and the Tom Cotton op-ed and how they handled it? And then my next question is, given all that we're seeing right now in terms of, you know, cancel culture and you know, trying to deplatform people, not only with things that they're saying now, but that they have said in the past, that seems to be more, that seems to be sprouting from the left wing, although the right wing seems to be using it now in retaliation, and seems to be picking up on it as well. So I just wonder, as like as a person from the left, what do you think people on the left are missing, or what do you think you wish they would understand a little bit more in order to not do it? Because it sounds like you're probably against canceling people unless for like really egregious, you know, sin, crimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Tom Cotton episode at the New York Times was, I think, pretty unfortunate. It could have been the source of a really interesting conversation about, you know, the nature of the New York Times platform, their editorial page, and the power of that page, and what should and should not be published there. Because I think there are reasonable limits to what the New York Times should give a platform to on their page, and of course they're a you know, they're a private entity that has every right to publish what they deem is appropriate. But the way that they dealt with it, in terms of having the editor step down, and you know, I think there was multiple HR moves, that someone took a demotion. It's, if you are you know, working in fear that a decision that you're going to make is going to put your career in jeopardy, even after you are willing to have a conversation about, you know, the learning opportunity that situation might arise, then you're going to be making some probably poor choices based on fear. And I do not think that that's appropriate. It's absolutely appropriate for us to have those conversations and say, look, you might have screwed up on this one, and we think that you should learn, and we think that, you know, what do you think, you know, how do you think you could do better next time? But if we don't even give people a chance to do that, it's just absolutely shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I agree. And I think actually it's one of the sort of better things about Braver Angels is giving people an opportunity to speak and speak their mind in an environment where they can, you know, feel safe doing so, and knowing that that people are there to support them and learn from them. Ruth, what do you think about all this?
So Greg, I want to respond to something you said, and I'll respond as sort of a couch or armchair psychologist. You know, having a polarizing thought, I think, is okay. And just because you're in Braver Angels, you can forgive yourself for that. You can get really mad, like irrationally mad at the other side, and just feel completely opposed to them. I mean, that's normal, that's healthy, and it is, I think, indicative of some very deep values we all hold. To repress those kind of emotions, I think, is unhealthy. And what we need to do is recognize them, analyze them, and articulate them with people who are ready to listen. And that's why I think Braver Angels is all the more important. Now I'm right there with you, Randy, and saying now more than ever, we need to behave in such a way so that we're building the world we want to live in. And if we don't, each of us, do that, then we're really opting out, and that's unfortunate. We have a very important role to play in speaking as we do, in feeling strongly as we do. Randy, I totally agree with you. I want to speak to people who think differently and who feel passionately. So if you're feeling polarized against people who are tearing down and spray painting statues of George Washington, talk to me about it. If you're part of that, well, I oppose you from the bottom of my heart. I think you're absolutely horrible. I'll admit it, because that's my feeling, and I'm not going to treat it as a polarized feeling. It is a deep conviction. That said, I would like to understand why. Why do you think you have the right to do that? And isn't there a better way? Can we talk this out? If we here aren't striving for that type of conversation, then we're going to have less and less of it nationwide. And as we approach November, we're only becoming more deeply divided. Michael, to your point, I think a lot of the divide is a narrative that the media capitalizes on, of course, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as you said. Braver Angels gives us a chance to kind of backpedal off that, right? And again, listen, setting an example, welcoming people in, and making sure that whether they're blue, right, far right, that they don't think polarizing ideas are somehow bad. I'll use a Jewish term or a Yiddish term, shanda. It's not a shame. It's not something that you should feel guilty about. Feel strongly, but just remember that you need to listen, you need to learn, remain curious. So that's why I just think we're so important. I think we're more relevant than ever.
James, I'm curious as to what you think about all this, because I know you are have a great antenna for finding ways in which we sort of bridge differences and finding the things we have in common. And you've done some great stuff on social that I think during this time when things seem to be going to pieces, people have really responded to. And I know in this conversation, we've kind of emphasized allowing people to really sort of be okay in their differences. And so I'm wondering how you've felt during these last few weeks, what you've heard in this discussion, and what you think Braver Angels' role should be during all this, and what it could be.
Yeah, sure. All right, and there is a lot to cover in these topics, but thanks, Greg. I mean, with this, question about do we have the right paradigm? I guess I have kind of three main topics. I mean, one, the question of what are we actually trying to solve for? Because there's all sorts of topics that kind of come up, which ones are kind of in and which are out. Can depolarization in general work, right? Like, regardless of what strategies, is this a field that's worthy, that's worthwhile? And then third, is Braver Angels choosing the right strategies to address depolarization? And in general, my answers would be that what I'm trying to solve for is what's known as affective partisan polarization. We can get into, but how people, different political parties increasingly feel negatively about each other, but then there's all sorts of other dynamics that you guys have brought up that can fit into that. Then can depolarization work? My answer is, I sure hope so, because otherwise I'm totally wasting my time here. But no, I do believe that there is a lot of potential, and there's a lot that can be done, mostly from social psychology, that does bring up a lot of commonalities, Greg, as you mentioned. And finally, does Braver Angels have the right approaches? Because I don't know exactly, Greg, what your friend was referring to with paradigm. I don't think some of Braver Angels' methods are scalable. I think it's a nice thing for certain people, but it's sort of niche. Although, Greg, you mentioned the kind of social media things, and that's much more where I kind of think about mass messaging and how people at scale can think better about each other. So lots to cover, right? I'll try not to take too long, but topic one, I mean, in terms of affective partisan polarization, still, you're right, there's all sorts of dynamics with different niches and, moderate blues and more extreme blues and, kind of more moderate reds, more extreme reds, and right, but still, I have to kind of narrow the target. What am I trying to solve for? What am I trying to do? And I mostly focus still on people who lean toward one party or another, right? We're still in a two-party system for the most part. When people are asked, are you a Democrat, Republican, or independent? Independent's most common, but then when you actually go a little deeper and say, well, do you lean to one side or the other? Less than 10% of American adults actually say they are true independents. So typically we lean one way or another. And so dealing with this kind of red-blue divide, even when the parties switch a little bit, as Michael was saying, 15 years ago, you could make an argument that it was mostly elite polarization. Now I think there's enough data that at a kind of individual level, every American, lots of Americans feel much worse about the other side, often from media reasons. We have partisan media, we have social media, we just have the prevalence of media, and news stories tend to be kind of divisive. It's this side did this, that side did that. So I think it's a right topic. Now, is any of this solvable? Is this useful to even address? And I think the answer is yes. So social psychology tends to see this as a problem between groups, and in terms of groups, when you see commonalities between groups, see some kind of cross-cutting identities that can reduce issues. You can elevate people on the other side, and people can say, wow, there's someone on the other side that I can really look up to, respect in some way. There's ways to look at people more as individuals, highlight that rather than just seeing them as stereotypes, and show a lot of stories of collaboration, some superordinate goals and friendships across divides. And Michael brought up something about movies. This is actually a great way to do this. It's called parasocial contact. Brave Rangers tends to use contact theory, that you have to be one-on-one with someone, but you can actually see this, that people can interact well, that there can be good examples of the other side. Kind of like Will and Grace did this, for maybe sexual minorities, but this could be done for depolarization. And actually, there's a group called Pathos Labs. It's thinking this kind of, again, mass scale that I think is possible. You guys also brought up a lot about kind of power dynamics between groups. And yes, right, there's a lot of resentment. There's kind of people on the top, and then others may not have college degrees, right, may have ethnicity, gender, whatever things, and they kind of, there are people on top who haven't seemed to play fairly, who possibly are seen as destructive, who, you talked about in siege mentality, right, seem to be taking away things from people, and right, people can feel like victims for good reason. I think that's in this space, and there's a lot that can be done. Now, does Brave Angels have the right approach? I do think it's nice to be able to feel heard, and I think that's a good avenue, but I think there's only a certain number of people who are willing to take the time and energy, or have the time and energy, to engage in the types of activities that Braver Angels does. So I think a lot of what Braver Angels does can be packaged in ways that a lot of people can see, and it can normalize behaviors, and I think more importantly, make people feel better about the other side. So I did a lot of stuff with social media, as Greg said, that there are a lot of commonalities, right? We all almost entirely think that, what the police officer did to George Floyd, putting the knee on the neck for almost 9 minutes is wrong and horrendous, right? That's kind of a common view. And, surveys show a lot of different commonalities. We tend to be seeing how we're different, go on social media, oh, the other side's so terrible, this is so miserable. You turn on Fox News or MSNBC, like, the other side's trying to destroy America. But there isn't like a lot of messaging that's like, actually, you can look at a glass half empty or half full, and there's a lot that's half full that we can emphasize. And so I think depolarization as a whole can do that, even if Braver Angels, may not be doing as much of that, might be using a lot of this very idealistic language, that might speak to very high ideals, when there's a lot of, kind of base commonalities and overlaps and individuality things and friendships that aren't super complicated, but, often highlight what people already know, but don't often think of when they're just inundated with divisive messages.
Interesting. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Ruth, you had, I know, something to.
Yeah, James, to your point, Hollywood, this must have been like 22 years ago, something like that. Did you ever see the sitcom Dharma and Greg? Dharma and Greg.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, we're 90s kids, so yeah, we know.
I'm not, you guys are. Yeah. Okay, so Dharma and Greg, and Dharma's like kind of crunchy granola, and Greg's real conservative. Awesome, I love that. And Brain Dead from 2016. Oh, if you guys haven't watched Brain Dead, watch that series. It's funny, it's scary, it's suspenseful, it's gross, but it's basically about ants from space that eat out half of the brain of Republicans and the other half of Democrats. So everybody who kind of starts a little polarized gets really super polarized. So Brain Dead, I wish they had a second season, but maybe the second season will, like, you know, be now 4 years later, who knows. Anyway, I also wanted to say, James, to your point about format, we're all going a little stir crazy. I mean, I go to work every day and I come back and I'm still going stir crazy. So I think once we have a little bit more freedom to safely exit our computer screens, Braver Angels needs to get up and at it and do something. The alliances, and several have done this, the alliances should have their discussions, come together to find some common ground, and then make it into an action item so that we are hands-on helping people or helping the environment or helping in some bipartisan, multi-partisan way. Let's get our blood flowing a little bit. And I think that will do wonders to focus our brains, take us literally out of our silos and out of our homes as soon as we can do so safely.
Yeah. Yeah, I always think there's a ton of opportunity for alliances to be, you know, Berkey and de Tocqueville, like little platoons, you know, to gather community together. But Randy, I know you had some thoughts. You said earlier you had some thoughts about criticizing beliefs versus criticizing actions.
Well, yeah, and you know what James mentioned about the scalability of what we do, I think is related to that. So, you know, I've been running a lot of workshops recently, focusing on the skills to speak to people both on the other side and our own side. And, you know, in the last skills workshop that I ran, you know, people spent a decent amount of time talking about how, you know, they have such a strong desire to practice the skills and use those skills in their conversations with people who think so differently from them, but it is so hard to stay in that mode. And I think that what is scalable for us is really harnessing that desire that people have to think differently and giving them the tools to do so. And I think what is at essence in that idea is kind of shifting the way that people think about those on the other side. And so what I was thinking about in terms of criticizing ideas versus actions, you know, this is a thought that I have been coming back to on a regular basis. I don't think that we can be angry at one another for the things that we believe, because one can't control what one believes. One just believes them, right? You believe things based on your, you know, what you've been exposed to, the ideas that have been emphasized to you, the life that you've lived. All of these things contribute to who we are as people. And so to criticize someone for holding a belief is completely counterproductive. You can try to understand how they came to that belief, and yes, you can certainly try to influence them, but to be angry with someone for something they believe is just, it's not based on how the world works. But you can certainly be angry with someone if they took an action based on that belief and it hurt someone, right? So I think that's part of the reframe that we need to have as an organization, that we need to say, look, you know, stop letting your emotions take you to that place of such anger based on someone's belief. And yes, if you see evidence that they've hurt someone and you can show them that, that you've hurt someone, that they've hurt someone, I mean, certainly do that. But but shoving in their face your contempt for their ignorant belief is not only not productive, but it's completely counterproductive, as we've seen. And people, I think, genuinely want a different way to interact with one another. And in workshops, in debates, when I've seen people realize that there is a different way, just the light bulb goes off, and they are so inspired by it. But the practice, right? That's why scalability is so difficult, because we need to practice this so often and on such a regular basis that it becomes an instinct in terms of how we think of other people, rather than something where we have to look at, rules and guidelines to help us stay within, that frame of mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I think you're right. I don't think we can control people's beliefs. I had to learn that in therapy a little bit, but I think we can also, I think while we can't control people's beliefs, I think we can emphasize that there is a value to, putting those beliefs under scrutiny. Like, I had a priest once who said that, like, no one makes it through seminary without going through a long, dark night of the soul and really questioning, like, do I believe in God? And I think as an organization, we can only teach people, like, look, believe what you're going to believe, but it's a good thing to really hold yourself to the fire and to expose yourself to different beliefs. Like, it's not deterministic that you're going to believe this thing. Like, I know my life, I've totally sort of kind of gone under paradigm shifts that have led to different beliefs. And I think it's a good thing to do, to strongly believe what you're going to believe, but recognize that it's good to attack your own beliefs sometimes. James, what you were saying about, sort of thinking like, oh my God, hopefully we're doing something good, because otherwise what are we doing here? Like, I actually felt that way during once the riots were first starting. I was like, there's no point. Like, what are we doing? Brave Angels have been around since the 2016 election, and things seem to have gotten worse as we've gotten bigger. Like, what are we doing? And I got out of that, and then conversations like this really sort of provide nourishment for my soul in a lot of ways. But so did a couple of days ago. Oh God, was it yesterday? Time moves. So many things happen now. Where David French wrote a column in the Dispatch that I thought was really, really interesting. And they tend to have a religious bent on Sundays, his columns do, but he got into the study by a group called Beyond Conflict, which I hadn't heard about before, but James, seems like you've heard of them. And something that, a discovery that he emphasized really kind of caught my eye, which is that a lot of people, if you ask them about the other side, the other party, they're not as hateful or as distrustful of the other side as I assumed them to be. His point was that people believe that the other side hates them. And that's really interesting to me, because when you go through a Braver Angels workshop, I feel like what a lot of people say that they get out of it is like, oh my God, I didn't realize I had more in common or with people who believe differently than me than I expected, or they weren't as bad people. But I wonder if we're missing something by not giving people the opportunity to sort of have the aha moment of like, okay, because I think people leave our workshops and they feel better about the other side, but I still think then it's possible to leave that workshop and go like, but it doesn't matter because they still hate me. So I've done something for myself in order to make myself less polarized and less distrustful of people who believe differently than me. But then you go out into the world and you think, well, it doesn't matter what I've done because everyone else on the other side still distrusts me and they're not going to listen to what I'm going to say. And I actually had that recently where I posted something on Instagram, it was a little Venn diagram of like, you can be pro-protest, you can think the death of George Floyd is terrible, you can think policing needs reform, and you can also think that these riots are terrible. And this one gal I know who's a friend of mine kind of wrote back saying, I don't think you quite understand, and I think you should like research this more before you post something like that. You should like do your research, become better educated. And I was like, oh, here we go. And I was going to join a happy hour with her and some other people. And I was really like dragging my feet. I didn't want to do it. And as luck would have it, she was the only one who joined for like the first 20 minutes. And in the first few minutes, I was like, she's going to harangue me. She's like, she doesn't want to talk to me. She kind of hates me. The friendship is over. And after about a few minutes, we were talking, laughing, have a great time. Like it never came up. And we had such a good time, and it was so good to talk with her. And I was like, oh, it was really me who was bringing all the baggage into it. I assumed she didn't like me because I posted something that she disagreed with, but she didn't at all, or at least didn't show it in any way. And so that's kind of an interesting twist to our mission that I never really considered before. Am I just missing a huge point, or is that new to you guys, or does anybody have any thoughts? Why don't, Michael, since you kind of look at this stuff, why don't we start with you and we'll kind of go around the horn, and we got about 10 minutes left. So a few minutes each.
Okay, well, I had a bunch of other comments from as the discussion has progressed.
Yeah,
so
whatever you want to say, whatever you want to roll with.
I'll get down to that point at the bottom. But, I think what I've been hearing and it's all good. But I think we lose the idea that, democracy is messy. It's messy. We're not supposed to all believe the same things. We're not all supposed to have the same interests. If we did, democracy would be really easy and it would be really boring. Okay, but it's messy. And the thing is that when I look at democracy and what your goal is in actually having a politics that's based on, on freedom of thought and freedom of action, is that you're looking as a society for a convergence. Okay, you're looking at say, okay, I have a difference from you. Is there a middle point where we can converge at and accept the facts that we're coming from different corners? Okay, and I see the problem that we have today is a lot of it is driving divergence, not convergence. Okay, and I think it's this whole cancel culture and things like that is a disaster. It's a disaster for democracy. It's a disaster for both sides. It's a disaster for the people that are being canceled. It's a disaster for the people doing the canceling. Okay, so let's say the media and the blue liberal left is able to cancel out the reds. Well, guess what? When we get to, they're not going to say anything. But when we get to an election, remember, we have a secret ballot. You're not going to cancel anybody, okay? And it comes back at you and bites you right, where it hurts. And so how can you have convergence in a free society if you start canceling people out and saying they can't speak? And, you're never going to get convergence. And it sort of grates me a little bit when people talk about beliefs, because when politics becomes religion, then we got problems, because belief systems don't converge. They don't. And if we're going to talk about politics as belief systems, then we're always in separate corners saying, well, you believe that, I believe this. And so how do you converge those two opposite things? To me, it's just like, you got to get away from belief systems. You got to say, okay, how can we test it against reality? You believe this, but can we test it against reality? And so to me, it says, no, we better deal with politics in the empirical sense, not the belief system. Okay, you may believe people are bad or people are good, but can we come to some way of testing whether they are bad and good or good? And so that's, I think, in our social media has kind of brought us to that, where no, you believe this. And so people are fighting on social media, which is bizarre. It's usually friend networks. It's like, why are you fighting on a friend network? But, it really becomes like those things that our grandparents or grandmothers said, don't discuss politics and religion at the table, at the dinner table with the family. Don't, because you know, that's just going to destroy the whole congeniality of what is a very congenial, you know, event, which is Thanksgiving dinner or something. So I think that's, you know, what we're seeing here. And I don't know how to get away from it, because now with the social media, you know, everyone has an opinion, and you know what they say about opinions. So that's sort of my view. As coming back to what your friend said, though, I think the point is that you posted that on Instagram or something. She shouldn't have come back and said, "Greg, do your research." She should have come back and offered the research she was talking about. That's a conversation. Instead of making you feel like you don't know what you're talking about, that wasn't the right approach. You do know what you're talking about. She should assume that you did all the research you needed to do. And then she should offer, "Hey, but I got a different point of view. Let's have a discussion." Too much in social media, people are telling other people to shut up. Okay? And that's, to me, that's not productive at all. You don't tell somebody to shut up, or you don't try to morally shame them. You say, "Hey, you know what? I assume you are acting in good faith, and I'm going to act in good faith too." And there you can have a conversation. I mean, I have, as a political scientist, I have friends on both sides of the spectrum, you know, and dealing in this kind of stuff, I'm always talking to people that have different opinion, but I just assume they're acting in good faith until they prove me otherwise, you know. But anyway, I think if Braver Angels can do that, get people to act in good faith, then yeah.
Yeah. Randy, I know you have a heart out in a few minutes, so do you want to just give closing thoughts, and then we'll go Ruth and James, and we're pushing on the hour mark, so it's just a few minutes each here.
Try to make it fairly quick. So, you know, one of the things that I want to respond to was the idea of, in the past, like we kind of separated our relationship with the people in our lives from their belief systems. And I don't think that that's really a reasonable expectation. I think that, you know, a person is the sum of their experiences and their beliefs, and that is such a core part of them that when we sit at the dinner table with our relatives and we say, okay, well, I want to preserve these relationships, so therefore I'm not going to verge into the really difficult things that might create contention between us and might hurt our relationship. Then, you know, in my mind, just the way that I am as a person, that means that relationship isn't as deep as I would want it to be in the first place. I don't understand that person at the level that I would want to. And so I do want to get to that sort of depth, in spite of the danger that it might pose to our relationship. But if I have the tools to manage that sort of conflict and conversation, then we can get to a better understanding of who we are as people. And the fact is that, you know, our beliefs and our experiences are very real, and are even quantifiable, right? If we say, you know, and I've had a few people in recent weeks talk about getting back to empiricism and what we can measure, and let's not, it shouldn't be just based on our opinions. It should be based on data that we can quantify and that we can show, okay, this is what's actually happening. But the fact is that data is used to quantify people's experience, people's lived experience in the world. And if someone is feeling genuine emotional pain, then that's real. That pain is real, despite the fact that it's not severing flesh, that it's not you know, interacting with our nerves in the same way. But I think that the caveat to that is that we cannot eliminate harm and suffering in this world completely. And I think that people have gotten a bit too obsessed with the idea of protecting those who they care about, the groups they care about, the people that they care about, from harm to such an extent that it makes life unlivable. It makes choices unmakeable. And that if we say any harm to someone that I care about is too much, then life loses its meaning at that point. And so we do have to we do have to be willing to risk harm to ourselves and to those who we care about to live meaningful lives. And we also have to get back to a mentality of I think, sacrifice that we have lost in this. In the developed world, we have grown so comfortable in our lifestyles that we are no longer willing to make those sacrifices to render that meaning that we still may think is right, but we aren't willing to rise to the challenge of making those sacrifices so that meaning can be manifest. And I think that that's a very unfortunate thing.
Yeah. Ruth, what do you think?
Well, I think we're going to have a really hard time, and we better be prepared for it, and we better be ready to sacrifice a lot of our time to the cause. I kind of give myself a little moral boost by making this very expensive necklace. It's blue, purple, and red nut. There are 3 of them, and I painted them yesterday and hung them around my neck, and they're to remind me to hang in there. And I know we can all hang in there together. And I know I sound like a nut myself, but I kind of am. Anyway, it's going to be hard. And Randy, you're absolutely right. You know, we got to hang in there, and we will get uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. Greg, I totally applaud you and your friend, because you did what's uncomfortable, right? You knew it would be kind of a drag talking to her, and she was probably feeling the same way about you, but you guys did what needs to be done and just talk through it, and then everybody feels better afterward. And if you don't feel so great, well, at least hopefully you have more to think about, right? I recommend everybody who loves Candace Owens, listen to Sean King. Everybody who loves Sean King, listen to Candace Owens. I listened to Sean King yesterday. Wow, I kind of like agree with some of the stuff he said. I was blown away. Yay. And I love Candace Owens. I mean, everyone has something to teach us, right? And we have to keep that in mind. We have to be intellectually curious. We need to talk politics and religion and everything at the dinner table. That has to be our new culture. So I am so appreciative. Greg, thank you so much for bringing us together today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And yeah, we got to manufacture your necklace and finally get that braver angel.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to do something else. I was going to put 3 chairs in my front yard, paint one of them purple, paint one of them blue, and paint one of them red. And with a sign saying we are not enemies but friends. But the problem is I would have torn off the grass, and my husband said no way. So yeah, he nixed that idea completely. I really want to do it, but so we got this instead.
Okay, awesome.
I'll send you guys one.
Please.
Yeah.
James, you get the final speech here before I wrap us up.
Oh man, yeah, I don't have any jewelry. I don't have any like visuals to share. I guess lots of books behind me, but that's boring.
Awesome.
But no. I mean, it actually is important to have some kind of like symbol, right? Like there is no like depolarization movement symbol, right? I mean, you got Black Lives Matter. You have the fist. Well, you got you got
music.
But yeah, in terms of vehicles to convey messages, like songs are very powerful, and so the songwriting contest, which is ending soon, if you see this before it's over, please submit your entries. Okay, so Greg, you mentioned the Beyond Conflict study that Dave French wrote about. Yeah, so they're known as meta perceptions. So we see the other side as worse than they actually are, and this is both true for beliefs. We think that their beliefs are more extreme than they actually are, and for like feelings about us. So we think that they hate us more than they do, and then when we feel that way, then we respond in kind. So we act toward the group that we think is there, even when they're not there. And then when we act in more extreme ways, they actually become more that way. So we kind of push ourselves into caricatures of where we thought we were at one point, and we get increasingly more polarized. So yes, I mean, trying to reduce these trying to affect the meta perceptions is a tactic more in common. Had some data, and Greg, the two of us have actually played with some social media posts that use this. We're more alike than we think kinds of messaging, right? And there's so much to cover. I mean, I guess when it comes to behavioral things, I tend to try to go for the simplest thing first, you know, kind of an Occam's razor approach. There will be some articles eventually where I talk about lower intensity depolarization or lid strategies. You know, like what's really easy. And, you know, I mean, social media, right? There's so much to criticize, but, you know, one potential behavioral thing on social media is just only use it like 15 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day. Like just don't be on it. It's very polarizing. It's very problematic. Just don't go, right? I mean, that's a good start. It's not, you know, rocket science, but if it's effective, then, you know, a lot of public health messaging is pretty simple. Brush your teeth twice a day. It's, you know, it's not this deep intellectual conversation, you know, I mean, eventually, you know, how to brush your teeth, but right, like the basic thing is super simple. And yes, I think there's some commentary about Twitter, like, so Jonathan Haidt just had a conversation, and yeah, I mean, his attitudes towards Twitter are really negative. That's another thing is, right, we can think about also structural changes, right? Like these social media companies do not necessarily exist in a vacuum, right? There are policies and conditions in which they operate, and depolarization, not necessarily Braver Angels, can think about, well, what are the constraints that can be put on them potentially, right? And that gets into all sorts of political discussions because, you know, what should the government do relative to some companies? But you know, I think there's a lot to play with that sometimes is a little easier because, you know, I know Braver Angels emphasizes bravery. Randy just talked about sacrifice. I mean, my goodness, these are incredibly strong terms. When sometimes a lot of the answers are like, yeah, they're kind of similar to us. And okay, like bravery might be more important for us talking to each other about like, what do we think is right or not and what to do? Because, you know, sometimes we'll contradict each other in these debates. But bravery, I don't think is necessarily what we expect from everyone.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think, you know, it's so important to have these conversations and to talk about the organization and what we're doing. And this has been, like I said, nourishment for my soul. It's always great to talk to you guys. I think this was a really good discussion. So I think there's some pieces in the pipeline from all of you. So everyone out there, please keep an eye on our Braver Angels media page to see some wonderful essays from these writers: Ruth Ashkenazi, James Coan, Michael Harrington, and Randy Lioz, who's already left. I've been Greg Steinbrecher. This has been a Writers Roundtable, and we'll see everybody in July.